next story, which is all about securities reference data. There has been a great flurry of activity in the securities reference data space with a strong focus on industry-level efforts to standardize identifiers. But is the industry effectively tackling risk through its approach to reference data? Well, to find out all about this and to discuss the critical issues and hot topics in this era, we're now joined by Robin Doyle. She is the co-chair of the LEI, the Legal Entity Identification Trade Association Group, Global Financial Markets Association. Next to her is Karla McKenna, chair of ISO TC68 from Financial Services. Göran is also with us. He is the global head of custody services at SEB. And Ronald, last but not least, sitting all the way over there, Chief Data Officer at the DTCC. Nice to have you all with us, and nice to have lots of ladies. We saved the best for last. Lots of ladies on the last day of our coverage. I want to start with you, Ronald, first of all. Just put this whole topic in perspective for us. What is securities reference data?
Sure, Kavita. Securities reference data are the basic building blocks of information that firms need to conduct business. They uniquely identify transactions. So, for instance, the identity of a security, the identity of a legal entity or a jurisdiction where a trade is occurring. Those are all components of reference data. The financial crisis brought out a flaw in the current system, in that while each firm has their own set of reference data, the reference data across firms is not consistent. So when regulators go to combine, to look at systemic risk in the system, it's very difficult for them to combine all of the different reference data for the firms. So what the industry is trying to coalesce around, in particular with legal entity identification, is a single unique identifier that is across firms to identify a party or a counterparty to a trade. I'm
going to bring you in, Karla, because you're very much focused on the LEI. Tell us a little bit about that and when we can expect to see it in force.
Well, the ISO 7442 standard, the LEI, has been a project that we have had a lot of success in building consensus very, very quickly. We started in February of this year, and we are looking to, at the earliest, have approval for that standard in December of this year. If we need a little bit more time and need to build a little bit more consensus within the ISO process, the end date that we're looking at is March of 2012, with publication in April of 2012. I've been involved in standards for a number of years now, and that is the quickest I've seen a standard move through the ISO process. So I think
that's
that
good news.
Yes, it's very, very good news for ourselves and the industry.
And Robin, what are firms doing in this particular area, and where do they feel they need to get to?
Sure. So I think we heard a couple of good points that up until now, we actually do struggle quite a bit in terms of aggregating data across a number of different pieces of reference information, but in particular around counterparties. So within our own firms, it can be very difficult to add up all the transactions we have with a company because there is not a standard identifier. So the industry, the firms in the financial services industry, have welcomed this opportunity to actually come up with a global universal standard identifier for legal entities, because it'll be very helpful for us for an internal risk management perspective, and it will be helpful to regulators in managing systemic risk.
Göran, I want to get some of your views on the conversation we've been having so far.
I just want to emphasize, I think the need for in general of reference data and the awareness of reference data in the industry is enormous, and the awareness within the business areas is not that good. And just an example, the LEI is very much driven now by a regulatory initiative instead of the industry itself have taken this initiative from the start, which would have been the obvious thing for us to do, because it will make us so much less vulnerable for counterparty risk. We will have better control of what's going on. And I think there is a number of other areas within the reference data field that we need to, as an industry, get a better grip of. And of course, SWIFT then will make a pretty good base together with some other organizations to do that. But the cooperative of SWIFT, involving 207 markets and also banks all over the world, is a perfect facilitator and part for that.
And do you feel now that we're starting to talk, particularly at this conference, about looking at tying up with other banks, particularly in Asia, in the Middle East? Do you think this is really the hottest topic in order to curb risk as we get more and more players from other parts of the world that we probably wouldn't have had before be involved in the financial interactive global community?
So I think in order to, from a regulator perspective, in order to really be able to manage systemic risk, they're going to need to be able to view the transactions across the globe. So for us to really make progress, we're going to need all the regions of the world to adopt this solution, and we are striving towards that.
What have been the challenges so far with what you've been dealing with? Because if you're not a person operating in this space, it can get very technical, and of course you need to have business leaders on board, and sometimes you may not necessarily be speaking their language.
Right. I just think it's a coordination effort. It's a global effort. With the industry and the global regulatory community all trying to get to the same common goal. And when you have a global effort, you have to, there are some technical issues you need to overcome, operational issues, as well as political issues. And I think it has been working through the process. I think there's been a lot of cooperation. I think everybody sees a common end game here and wants to strive for it. I would also say it's while it is a lot about risk, it's also about cost reduction. If the industry, if the global community can do this correctly, it can really reduce a lot of the costs that the firms and the community spends maintaining this information today on their own. If you can mutualize that cost, it's really good for the global industry.
How much cost are we talking to take out of the system here?
It's hard to tell. The only estimate that I have seen is that firms are spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 or $500 million a year doing legal entity identification scrubbing. And we would hope through mutualizing those costs we could take 80-90% of that out of the equation.
And what kind of investment do people need to make, though? Because I think that's one of the key issues. I've heard it time and time again, and no matter what area we're working at this conference, people are saying, yeah, it's all well and good to cut costs, but the kind of investment that I need to make in order to do that, and then the regulators are going to come along and eat up some of the cost savings that I've already made.
Yeah. So the reality is that we are going to need to report to the regulators information about our counterparties no matter what. So it's going to cost us money regardless. So we might as well do it the right way. And this will be a worthwhile investment because in the long run it will substantially reduce costs at our firms.
I want to get some final comments from all of you as people leave here today, the last day of Sibos 2011. Obviously, this is, I'm sure, an issue we're going to be talking about in Japan next year. Tell me what you want these people who are leaving here, when they go back to their desks and can start to conduct their business again, what do you want them to take away from here in terms of moving this process forward?
So I would just say, understand that legal entity identification is important, that there is a new standard that is likely going to be coming, and that we need to start to prepare for that in our firms, which means thinking about in 2012, integrating this particular identifier into our systems.
For me, I would like to leave with the participants of Sibos that the level of cooperation is at a high point, and to continue that cooperation and collaboration, because there is a space where firms can come together and industry and regulators can come together in a collaborative space.
Göran?
Well, I would say to everyone go back to your organization, get a clear strategy for the reference data in general, and start working on actually using it the best way it can. For the LEI, get your community in your local market, get the discussion with the authority and get this going, because we have opportunities here, so just go back and do it.
And I think the LEI is an example of how the industry is on the cusp of something which can be game-changing. And I think if the industry can coalesce around LEI, there are a lot more business models that are available to the industry to operate much more efficiently and to also help regulators at the same time.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much to all of you. Robin Doyle, co-chair of the LEI Trade Association. Next to her, Karla McKenna, chair of ISO TC 68 Financial Services. Göran Fors from SEB, and Ronald Jordan, chief data officer at the DTCC. Many thanks to all of you.